Okay, we are now streaming live.
Okay, perfection. Good evening, everyone. We are back this evening as well with Avance Ensemble, and we are continuing our wealth series. And this evening, we are diving into. Hold on, I got to make sure to type my. Wait, sorry, my phone is actually streaming live too. So this evening, we have come through a very awesome journey together. We've been together the past couple of weeks. Faithfully, Wednesday night, you guys have come out, you have asked questions, you have shared tips, and we're definitely hoping that even though tonight is our last segment for our wealth series, that the conversation will continue, and we're really hoping that what we've been able to share with you over the past couple of weeks will definitely help in your wealth building journey. So, recap, we went over what our money journeys have been, what our money conversations have been in our own homes. We circled, and then we moved on to budgeting. How are we ourselves? What is our relationship with money, and what does that look like? And we gave some great tips on how we can better and strengthen our relationship with money. We went into debt and debt management. Most importantly, debt management that was an awesome conversation. If you haven't been following the series, definitely go back to the Avance page to touch base on these subjects. We also followed that up with a mortgage series. What we should know: many of us are involved in financial transactions. We have credit cards, we have mortgages, but we know very little about how to really effectively manage those things. And so we sat down with a professional that works in the mortgage industry to give us just some tips and some insight so that our community is better equipped as we interact in these various ways. And this evening, we wanted to culminate with investing. We wanted to end our series on a high note, in that we have gathered the information on building better credit. We have gathered the information on mortgages and on savings and on budget. And we didn't want to walk away without having some solid tools on investing. Now that we have better knowledge on how to protect our money and how to how to acquire it and how to manage it, how do we grow it? What are some of the conversations out there that we may not have been privy to, or perhaps just don't have as many details on? So Avance Ensemble really wanted to end our series on that high note. Now that we know a little bit more about money, let's go build the wealth. Let's go out there and actually grow the wealth and grow it for our legacy and for our families. And with that in mind, we wanted to make sure to have a professional join us this evening to share some details, to answer some of our questions, and to share some of her insight, having been a professional in the field. And of course, tonight again, we have Gil Crispin, our board member, with us. So Gil started out as just answering our Avance some questions when we started the series, but he's been such an integral part in just keeping the conversation going and sharing just great insight and sharing great questions throughout. That Gil is here to end out the series with us. So say hi, Gil.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Amaral.
Gil has the fan club in the background. Hey, Ebony.
Really, right? I'm just happy
family, guys,
and join you, brilliant ladies. So thank you for having me.
And I'm gonna let Gil introduce our specialists, because he knows just briefly, just point to.
So I'll just briefly, Io is here. She is phenomenal. She's amazing. She's brilliant. She's such a wealth of knowledge, and I've learned so much from her. And it's really just great to have a Black woman who is able to share her knowledge in a way that is digestible to so many of us who really just don't have the same points of reference or learned experience. So Ayo, take it away. You can introduce yourself. I just wanted to kind of say how awesome you are.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here with everyone tonight to discuss any of the issues and questions that I know a lot of people may have around finances and investing and how to get started in this space that I know a lot of times seems really daunting. Unfortunately, we grew up in a society where there's a bit of a conundrum, right? We're told that everyone needs to be investing, but everyone's not an expert at investing. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll lay out a few principles of planning and why they're really important. And then maybe I'll hand it back over to you, Gil, and we'll do some back and forth with questions.
Sounds good.
So a little bit about myself. I began in the financial services industry in 2007. At that time, I worked in compliance for a major insurance company, a Fortune 100 insurance company at the time. I got my first securities license in 2012, and I later joined Merrill Lynch in 2015. Fully licensed SEC, FINRA, all of that, specialized in private equity. And I recently left Merrill Lynch in November 2019, just recently, with the intentions of working on my own brand. So hopefully I'll be able to reach out to all of you guys and give you a ton more of amazing content that you find valuable that way in the upcoming years. But the reason I came into the financial services sector primarily was because I see that there's a dearth, especially at the level of finance that I was working in. There's a dearth of people of color represented both in terms of the people on both sides of the desk, right? As clients and as advisors. And unfortunately, those two sort of feed each other, just due to the nature of the way that the industry works. But I really want to be able to help people cross that threshold from the middle class into affluence. And a lot of times, we're not really sure exactly how to go about that. And my biggest takeaway from working sort of with the affluent markets is the way that they think about things. The approach is the biggest pivot that needs to happen in order for people to sort of psychologically transfer from the middle class into the upper class. So I'll just go ahead sort of and get started laying out some of those basic financial principles, because typically it's not usually what folks are expecting to hear. Unfortunately, it's not, financial planning isn't as sexy as 1980s, Wall Street movies with stockbrokers running around and, making things really hype and exciting. It's not that at all.
So it's not the Wolf of Wall Street.
It is not, for the most part. For the most part. There's a little bit of that left. I can't lie. But for the most part, the industry's really sort of been dialed back a lot. And it's been primarily due to regulators. Because what was found was that both from a regulatory standpoint and from what clients really needed, a more holistic approach, right? Like it wasn't just, hey, let me call you with this hot stock tip that I have, as opposed to figuring out ways that your purchasing and selling of stock positions would impact your overall tax position or your overall standing financially in a way that makes the most sense. So we want to take an overall high level view of your financial position so that we can get you to your goal most efficiently, in a way that obviously you're minimizing your taxes, you're getting the most returns, and you're reaching your goals, right? Those are typically the primary objectives that people have. So the biggest mistake I tend to see that people make is just wanting to dive right into investments, right? What do I need to buy? What's that hot stock pick? What should I, what fund or something like that should I be investing in? And we really need to take a step back and start at the very beginning of the financial planning process. So that's kind of where I'd like to walk everyone through today. I typically refer to this kind of as the planning pyramid, just because you kind of have to complete one level to graduate to the next. And as you continually graduate to each level, there are different things obviously that you need to be doing and different inflection points that you need to be sort of checking off and bouncing from one activity to the next. So the very, very first thing that we like to discuss is always, I call it protection, right? You want to protect your assets, everything you already have before you worry about acquiring more. I think most people overlook that, but it's the most important thing. You can't really focus on, how do I turn my $100,000 portfolio into $1 million portfolio when you've not protected the house that you own.
Mm.
Because if you die tomorrow, your kids aren't going to get that hypothetical $1 million. They're going to get that house that you already own. So what have you put in place to protect what you already have? At every step of your planning process, you want to always ensure that you're protecting what you have. You acquire, protect, acquire, protect, acquire, protect. That should always be sort of the approach that you take to ensure that, for lack of a better word, CYA, right? So a part of that process is your basic documentary planning. This is the absolute basic thing where everyone needs to start. So the first thing that would be your will. Anything that you own. If you own a car, who's going to get the car if you die? If you own a bank account, who's going to get the money in the bank account when you die? Now, you can designate a beneficiary. You should have a beneficiary on file at your bank for your account, but even still, there are like other assets. If you have the safety deposit box or anything like that they have at the bank, any asset that you own, if you don't have written down on a piece of paper, this is what I want to happen to it, this is who I want to get it, it will go through probate, which is a whole long, horrible process. I did a brief internship in that court, and the main takeaway that I learned was don't have your assets go through probate. It is not what you want. And it's also public. So, if you've amassed a lot of wealth, you don't want everyone to know what you have and who's going to get it at the end of that long process either. It's completely public record. So the way that we avoid that is by establishing a revocable living will. And that just ensures that everything that you own goes to exactly who you want it to go to when you pass. The term revocable just means that it's changeable. So if you create a will and you have 2 kids and then you have a 3rd child, you're able to go and update it, which is really important. If you acquire additional properties, obviously you have more income, you have your portfolio, you get a new portfolio in addition to what you already had, etc. You can always make those types of adjustments that you need to make in order to keep it current. A good rule of thumb is to review all of these types of documents at least once a year, just to make sure that they're current, so that everything is all of your wishes are executed as you'd like them to be done.
So Io, really quickly, so I guess before folks even get to the investment standpoint, there's this pre-work that has to be done, which starts with obviously protecting what you already have.
Yes.
And obviously one of the mistakes you see a lot is people just jumping right in terms of buying stocks, buying whatever, and not necessarily protecting what they already have.
Correct.
That's
the biggest mistake.
Okay.
The state of Florida, every state, but the state of Florida has a huge, they have unclaimed assets division.
Mm-hmm.
People who died without having any plans for their assets, and no one knows how to do anything with it. That's literally almost $1 billion. Were this, I think it was at Senate was having an argument because they were talking about liquidating that fund, because it's just money that's been sitting there for decades in some cases, of people who passed away and their assets are just in limbo. That's ridiculous.
Let me ask you.
Sure.
So what I'm hearing from you is, because one of the first things you said when it came to protecting your assets was if you own a car. So a lot of times I find that we think that we have to have amassed assets as far as large amounts before we actually take any steps to protect it. But if you own a car, is a lot of people. So it sounds like what you're saying to me is at every level, we should be taking certain steps to protect. Because I always wonder that if my name is the only one on my car, and God forbid I pass away single intestate, what happens to my car?
Exactly.
Does,
but no one can decide that but you. And it has
as
to be
basic of an asset as your vehicle or whatever. I mean, I don't want to say your clothes if that's all you own. Someone will sweep them out of the closet, but anything that you actually own, I don't need to wait until I am both a homeowner and business owner before I start doing
everything, anything that is of any value to you or potentially anyone else. If it's a stamp collection, who's going to get your stamp collection?
And it always amazes me how many people of means pass with zero instruction. And in this day and age, especially with in the year of COVID,
Exactly.
I think this point is especially important to be made. We have no guarantee that our 28-year-old selves or 42-year-old selves are going to be here another 42 years or less, for another 42 days.
Exactly. And to be frank, once you reach the point of having dependents and people who implicitly are expecting to inherit from you and you fail to do so, it's a breach of your responsibility, right? Like, the expectation is what you have goes to your heirs. But if you, by not taking the proper legal steps, you're actually creating a blockade and making it more difficult for them to inherit from you. It's not something that's going to happen automatically. And there are any number of scenarios: divorce, remarriage, children outside of marriage, business ownership stakes, legal, if you have a business partner who has a legal claim, any number of things could impede upon the things that you automatically assume would go to your children.
So I think I wanted to chat because someone in the chat, they said, well, listen, I don't own anything. I don't have anything to protect, but I want to invest. What's your input on that? But I think also this person, is a business owner, and maybe what they hadn't thought about is kind of what you just mentioned, like, oh, well, I own a business, so that business may have assets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what most people don't know, if you're not a sole proprietorship in the state of Florida, if let's say there are two business partners and one partner dies, then you automatically become business partners with your business partner's heirs. And if they didn't declare anyone, it's who the state declares as the heir of their estate. So this can get really convoluted very quickly.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Aya. So we start by protecting with a will. So that's generally our step one.
We're still on step one. There's more.
Okay. This is good.
There's more.
But I think what's really important about this conversation, honestly, is that I think we jump. We jump to conclusions. And I think back to my grandmother, when she passed away, my paternal grandmother, she had this paper with the amount that every single person got, like down to the dollar. And I was so grateful for it because there was no fighting and pushing and anything like that. You came, you picked up your money, and then you left. That was that on that.
So, and that's the way it's supposed to be, realistically. It makes things easier for everyone that you leave behind.
Okay, so what's the So Gil and I have, and Danny, our invisible partner, we shout out Danny every week because Gil and I like to talk about this stuff. And so we always end up like an hour and a half in. So what is step two? So now we're on
step 1. There's step 1A. Step 1A.
Step 1A. Continue, because what we also want to do is make sure that although we want to give investment advice, like Gil said, I think our primary objective as Avancé Ensemble and as this team has been better equipping our people with information.
Correct.
So although we want to get to giving you some pointers as far as investing is concerned, but this is part of that process.
This is it. If you don't have these things in place, you are not ready to invest.
Say it again, please, Ayo. Say
If
that
you
again.
do not have, like, this is a pyramid. I call it the planning pyramid for a reason. Like, if you don't have the base of your pyramid in place, you're not going to get to the top. Investing is at the top of that pyramid. You can't just start out at the top. You have to climb up from the bottom.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear these other steps now. Okay.
So, speaking to your point, Amaral, like, most people tend to think of about a will. What I think, what in the way that I believe most what you were referring to as a trust. So a trust is basically the same type of idea as a will, right? It's assigning who you want to be the beneficiary of all of your assets. It's a bit more complex. It costs more to get done. Typically, you can pay about $300 to $500 an hour for an attorney to draft a will for you. It shouldn't take that much. Trusts typically are a lot more complicated. So those are for people who have shared business interests, international assets, things along those lines, which can be a little bit more complex, but they do fall within this scope. Along with documentary planning would also be your power of attorney. So your power of attorney is important because it decides your, hold on. No. Okay, so your power of attorney basically decides who will determine what happens to your assets in the event that you lose your capacity. So the reason that's important is because, God forbid, we're 2020, COVID. A person could be in the hospital on a ventilator. First of all, the first decision has to be made, will you be put on a ventilator? I had that situation in my own family. You know, my cousin's wife got the question, do you want us to put him on a ventilator? Yes or no? Because it's not always next of kin. This is something that's particularly important for people who are cohabitating, not married, or have very specific religious and personal beliefs as it relates to their healthcare treatment. So that affects things like blood transfusions and what do you call it when you get
organ donors?
Organ donation, things along those lines. So that's why it's very important to have these things written down in writing. And again, it's something that you want to review on an annual basis. So that's your healthcare power of attorney. Your standard power of attorney is your third document. And that just it kicks in at the same time for the same reasons if you become incapacitated and unable to make decisions for yourself, but it affects who takes over your financial responsibility. So this would be the person to make sure that all of your bills are being paid. Have you been in the hospital for 6 months? Should we sell your house? Have you been in the hospital for a year now? Should we sell your house? If we've sold your house because you've been in the hospital for a year, what are we doing with those proceeds? What bank are we using? And this person basically you're giving them the authority to sign your name. So that is huge because, again, this coinciding with your will, right? They're getting direct access to those assets that are tied to your will. They're not able to go back and change your will, but they have direct access to all of the assets that you've delineated there. So that's extremely important. And again, something that you want to maintain on at least an annual basis. God forbid you have a power of attorney set up with your ex-spouse. You may or may not be on the best of terms. So you always want to, again, make sure that that's something that's current and that you're always on top of. So now that you've got your documentary planning taken care of, that's the very base of your pyramid. One level up from that would be the protective assets. This would be your insurance, your life insurance, your savings account. So there are lots of different types of life insurance. I do recommend everyone at least have some. Term obviously is the cheapest. Then there's different types of permanent insurance. Typically, I recommend a blend if you can afford it, but it's the best way to protect the assets that you have. The thinking behind life insurance is, again, 2020 COVID, right? You have a loss of a breadwinner in the household. Let's say that person's bringing home, $50,000 a year, and you have a 10-year-old that you wanted to. Now that $50,000 a year is missing from your household income. if you have a 10-year term insurance policy, for $500,000, essentially that 10-year-old is compensated for those additional 10 years of income that's lost due to the death of that breadwinner. That's theoretically the purpose behind it.
So let me just go through this again. Before we even begin to invest, before you go create a Merrill account, before you go create a Schwab, a Fidelity, Scottrade, well, it's now Fidelity, whatever it is.
If you do not have these things in place, you are not ready.
You're not ready.
You are not ready.
You need to get your documents together, right? So the documents are your will, right? A living revocable will, meaning one you can change. You need to make sure that's something that you're reviewing annually.
Correct.
And then you need to get a power of attorney, both a healthcare power of attorney and a standard power of attorney. So that's our step 1A and B. And then step 2 or 1C, then you need to now, which is what you just said, which is
life insurance.
Life insurance. And obviously there are different policies up and around, but I think what I was mentioning is taking care. That begins the protection. So like you said, if you lose life, if someone happens to lose their life, with this policy, you can cover years of living down the line for someone who is no longer able to contribute to the household.
Another very common use of life insurance is, again, in that situation where you have co-owners of a business, you periodically every year, every 3 years, every 5 years, have the business valuated. And if it's a 50-50 split, then the value of the insurance, each owner gets their share in life insurance in the event of the death of one of the co-owners, to prevent the situation we spoke about previously, wherein one of the business owners would become business partners with the heir of the other partner's estate. We call that, when we use life insurance for that purpose, it's called it's a part of your business succession planning. So again, I know typically I have to literally like strap people down in the seats, say, no, we're not going to talk about, Apple or Google right now. We're going to start at the beginning. You don't start running a race in the middle of the race, because you're not really in the middle. You're really starting 50 feet behind.
Ooh. Now, I want to ask you, Io, while we're working through these, one of the things Io and I have spoken about, Umbrella and I have spoken about, is the mindset. And I think right before we went live, Io was beginning to talk about the mindset. And I think, Umbrella, obviously, you're a realtor and a tax person, so I'm sure you struggle with the mindset a lot as well in a different way. But the mindset to breaking through to this wealth, moving from middle class to the wealth portion of things, is this part of what you struggle with? Like people kind of working backwards or not knowing what step 1 is and looks like? Absolutely.
And there's several things, right? It's not understanding what the landscape looks like, because typically in communities of color in particular, we don't have conversations around money. We don't have conversations around the dinner table around grandma's will, right? So the notion of protecting those things is brand new to us, or it sounds like something, like Emerald said, that's not for me just yet, So it's really a matter of sort of reining it in and just starting at the very beginning.
Got it.
Another thing that I typically see in communities of color is an aversion to risk, which is, once we finally do cross the threshold into being eligible to invest, the tendency is to hold on to the cash. What's the most conservative thing, or give me the thing where you can tell me exactly how much I'm going to get. And the third thing that I'd probably say would be an aversion to fees. We typically, if it's free, or I see all these free funds that trade for free, or free ETFs, and I don't understand why I have to pay a fee. Well, the asset classes that pay the most and have the highest returns typically also have the highest fees.
So just to clarify, go ahead, Amaral, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, and this is why conversations like this are so important, As much as this is an investment conversation, it really is about changing mindset and about just providing a level of information, because it's very often that we are not immediately trusted as the professional, whether or not you are degreed, whether or not you are experienced by your own. You're often not ready. You're not readily given the benefit of the doubt, especially when the information that you're presenting may be contrary to what they saw somewhere else. I always like to claim my law degree that I obtained through Law and Order. So I know how this goes because I've watched a lot of Law and Order.
Absolutely.
So I give that to people when I try to be as patient as possible, which is so necessary, because I'm listening to this and it's, yes, all of these pieces are very important, but I also know that oftentimes we're like, no, but I came here to invest. I just want to figure out, like, should I choose Robinhood or should I choose Merrill Lynch? Which should I? And definitely the aversion to fees, to paying for what we need, is something to overcome. So I really hope that our audience that's here with us tonight and that will come back and listen to this, that let's really take this to heart, to understand there really is no free lunch. And a lot of times what they claim is free is really costing us a whole lot more. I mean, Kool-Aid is super cheap, and green tea is more. Green tea with honey is more expensive, but down the line, one really does end up costing us a whole lot more. So,
exactly.
Kudos to you for sharing that.
Thank
you.
Go ahead, Gil.
No, the chat is on fire. I just want to let everybody know this is the information is really resonating with so many people. I think we're all realizing how we've kind of done this backwards. So I think this is really, really good. So, okay, we have our insurance, our life insurance in place.
Yes.
What do we do next?
So the next thing after your life insurance, again, this is still under that protection sort of leg of the pyramid or step in the pyramid, would be savings.
Okay.
Growing up, when we were growing up, at least, conventional wisdom was that you should have about 6 to 8 months of liquid savings available for emergencies. But I mean, we're all millennials, Gen Z at least. We've lived through 2008. We understand now that curve has been extended a lot longer. We've seen longer periods of boom in our economies, but along with that, we've seen longer periods of bust, longer periods of unemployment. I think in 2008, like, unemployment didn't get back to normal, which is, I think, under 3%, for about 2 years. So conventional wisdom now is that you have at least 10 to 12 months of liquid savings available. And that monthly figure is based on your absolutely essential expenses. So it's not how much you spend in a month, but it's when you sit down, write out your budget, those things that you absolutely must pay every month, that's your monthly expense. So you want to have between 10 and 12 months of liquid savings available for that purpose.
So someone just asked a question. Can you save in life insurance?
So it's funny. When I started out in the industry and when I was compliance, I worked in life insurance. So the short answer is no, right? So a lot of times life insurance companies or representatives will tell you, well, you can use this sort of like a CD, or this money will grow, and let me show you an illustration of what that looks like. Number one, they use the least likely scenarios in those illustrations. Number two, it's only in a certain types of permanent, it has to be permanent life insurance that you're putting money into. Number three, it's not necessarily liquid available money. And number four, it's not in asset classes where you can, if you sit down with a financial professional, an investment advisor, and say, okay, well, draw me a projection and for a 10-year projection, and come at year 7, you're probably going to be within depending on the company and the analysis, within 10%. With a life insurance company, you're going to be within 60%. That's a huge variation because what they're doing with the underlying asset and their obligations with the underlying assets are very different.
So in essence, I mean, to that question, I would definitely be read the fine print, make sure you know.
Don't do it.
Oh, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Life insurance.
Okay, that's why I love Ayo. She gonna tell you straight up. So to Rosalie, Louis Marc, don't do it.
Don't do it. And I know for a fact when I tell you I worked in a life insurance company. That's where I told you I got my first license at a life insurance company. Don't do it. It is not prudent, and they will sell you the world on that. Buy life insurance. You need life insurance for the purpose of life insurance.
So a couple of things. Someone asked, Isman Jean-Louis in the chat asked, where should you start in terms of investing? Isma, you have like a few steps before we even get to that. So you need to get a will.
We're getting there.
Yes. So you need to get a will. You need to get a power of attorney. You need to get life insurance. You need a few steps. So we're
getting there.
Question to that person. What was his name?
His name was Isman.
Isman. My question to you, Isman, is this. Where is the money that you would be putting in an investment account being held right now?
I don't know if he hears us right now, but as soon as he gets back, I'll let you know.
Because to anyone else who has the same question, wherever that money is being held today, if you die tomorrow, who gets that money? That's the most important. If you can't answer that, you're not ready to open an investment account. That is my point.
So, and now, do you recommend both being a beneficiary, having beneficiaries on the accounts in addition to the will, or will one do both?
Absolutely, as long as you're updating both.
As long as you're updating both, awesome. So, okay, we are now at where? We just got our life insurance, right? And now we did
savings.
Savings. So we're talking about 10 to 12 months.
Yes.
So now this is the question. Amarel, we thought we were doing good a couple of weeks ago at 6 months.
I think we were at 6 months.
Correct. So now in essence, we need to basically be doubling that and shooting for 12. And this is essential expenses only.
Yes.
Amarel did a phenomenal series on saving. Amarel, do you want to talk about that briefly before we go to the next?
Well, one of the things that we discussed, it was during our budget segment, and we also talked about putting money away into your savings account. We didn't necessarily aim, well, we did. We aimed for a number. Conventional wisdom in the past has been somewhere between three to 6 months. So we were at 6 months, but I know that through a lot of the conversations that I've had with people, especially people of knowledge like yourself, over the past couple of months has been, but now there's COVID. And COVID has really shined a light into the dark spaces of possibility. And it's causing us to be more open to the fact that we may need more preparation than in times past we thought that we would actually need. So we thought we were doing good with 6 months. We thought we were, our advice is 50, 30, 20. So that 20% is going towards between debt, savings, and investing was the other point of what we were doing with our 20. So that's what our advice was. Is that advice out of sync with what you would advise right now, especially with trying to build up to possibly a 12 months worth of savings?
No, I think that for most people that's pretty consistent, but I would like to point out the fact that for the average American, right, we're just sort of getting that light bulb. But for the affluent class, that's what we've been telling them. And that's my point, right? Like this isn't new information. It's just not trickling down in the way that it's supposed to. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
That makes sense.
That is the
Because even the
problem.
first time,
Why I'm here.
and quite honestly, even the first times that I heard of, and this was, a few years back, thankfully, that I heard about having 3 months worth of expenses, that sounded new and virtually impossible to me, coming from a background of living paycheck to paycheck. One of the things that we talked about first episode and second episode was, quite honestly, we did not have a mindset of saving, because not simply because, oh, we didn't care about savings. There was never anything to save. So we didn't get to flex those muscles of saving because there was never anything to save. And now that there is, and a lot of us, thankfully, our parents made the sacrifices and we are now career-wise and financially in better places, we still do not have the habit of saving. So we spend until it's empty. We spend until the pocket is empty, until the account is empty, and then add to it based on next paycheck or next project. But this may seem to the uninitiated ear like crazy information, that how do I save 12 months? That sounds ludicrous. But like you're saying, this is new information simply to us.
So let me ask, this is a good question for both Io and or Amaral. You have someone who's really, struggling. They're not necessarily, they can't see themselves potentially saving 12 months. What is a good number out of every paycheck? Like what for most people is a reasonable number, right? And obviously I'm speaking, from a point of privilege. I might be able to do more than some, less than others. But what should we aim to at the very least pull out of every paycheck to start building this 12-month savings account?
Well, in reality, it's what you can, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I say that with the caveat, another, if this would be the fourth thing probably that I struggle with my middle class clients. Pay yourself first. Don't be obsessed with paying off debt.
Mm.
If your choice is between hustling to pay down a credit card, paying the minimum payment on the credit card, and paying yourself more, pay the minimum payment on the credit card and pay yourself more.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, that's what's going to pay off in the investment in yourself is what's going to pay off in the long run. All you're going to do is pat yourself on the back for paying off your credit card.
Mm. Let me just say this. One of the things I love, the reason I love talking to Io so much is because there's always so much damn unlearning for me that happens, and I so appreciate it every time. Okay, so we will go to I want to tap a few questions in here. Someone asked for a will. Is this for anyone at any age?
Anyone who has anything.
So the answer to that question is anyone who has anything. Isman, we asked Isman where their money was being held, and they said that it's in a 401k and they also have a Roth.
Then you can't touch that money. It's already invested.
Say that again.
It's not investment money.
You can't touch it.
There you go.
It's already being invested. Number one, and number two, you'll be hit with a 10% IRS penalty unless you're over 59 and a half. And on top of that, you'll have to pay regular income tax. And if the amount that you're taking out of the 401k or Roth bumps you up into a higher tax bracket, you're paying a higher tax bracket on all of your annual income. So let's say if the tax cutoff, I don't remember what it is right off the top of my head, but let's say if you're making $110,000 and you take out 10 from your 401k and that bumps you over the 110 threshold, so instead of your tax bracket being 28%, it'll bump you up to 30% on your whole $110,000 income. So no, that's not what you want to do. Your money is already being invested. You don't have money to invest, and you just need to look at your allocations and your risk horizon for where you already are. We'll get to that.
A couple of things I want to touch on really quickly. Isman or Rosalie asked a great question. Why does everyone give different information to our people. So I'm just gonna say this, everybody ain't IO. I'm just gonna brag on IO. Everybody ain't IO. She ain't gonna give you no different information. This information, if you got this from her 3 years ago, it would be the same right now. But I think that in any community, you have to think about, one, who's giving you the information, how are they benefiting from what they're giving you, and what is their knowledge base, right? What is their proof of concept? What is their proof of what they've done before? So I just want to say those are things to look at. Someone asked a great question.
Gil, before you move on, the other thing, speaking to that point, and it was something that is another crucial takeaway, I think, for everyone in the chat. When people come to our community to speak on finances, they typically, and I mean, not even typically, I will say more often than not, are not properly licensed. That's why the first thing I said when I introduced myself was that I'm licensed with FINRA and the SEC, because no one can sit down and talk to you about licenses or about investments if they're not licensed to do so.
And what is FINRA?
FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority.
Thank you. For those listening.
That is where you go to verify if you're going to use TD Ameritrade or Schwab or Merrill or anything, you want to see complaints or anything like that. They held all of our records. They're the ones who come in when you watch like Billions and shows like that they're the ones who initiate for the SWAT team to come in with those blue jackets. That's FINRA and the SEC together. The SEC is the Securities Exchange Commission, yes. And they work together with FINRA to provide license, to make sure that everyone's obviously licensed and capable of doing our jobs. And they provide very strong compliance and oversight. So I almost never, I'll put it that way, see people coming into our communities to talk about finance and investing who are properly licensed. They're financial coaches or some other thing that's not a real thing.
So someone asked, so check the licenses, right? Start asking like the police ask for the licenses. Someone asked,
if you don't take anything else away from tonight, check the licenses.
Check the licenses. So someone asked, since they're backwards, right? And I think a lot of us are backwards here. You know, our pyramid is all kind of jacked up. Someone said, can they count their investment account as part of their savings?
No. The reason why you can't is because I said it has to be your liquid savings. So when you place a trade to buy or sell a stock, it has to settle. It takes 3 days to settle a trade.
That's correct.
So for something to be liquid, it has to be readily available. So we typically don't consider these stocks and bonds and the things that you'd hold in a portfolio as liquid assets for that reason.
Okay. So now that we have our savings account, our 12 months of living expenses, right? Covered, right? Our necessities covered for 12 months. What's our next step?
I will make a recommendation before we get there, because once we leave savings, we're ready to invest. So, but my only recommendation for savings.
We're almost there.
Yes, we are almost there. No rush, and I'll tell you why in a second. But
no, this is good. This is good.
It's so good.
It's helpful. Two things. So the places you want to save your money. I typically would recommend what's called a liquidity fund. And the reason I recommend those is because it is a managed account. You have to go to an advisor or use a platform and pay a fee. But after the fee, you're still going to net around 2% typically on your cash. Now, a typical bank is going to pay you close to 0.8%, no fees, but you're down approximately 1.2% right out the gate.
So this is good. Someone asked about this. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Ayo. A liquidity fund. So don't just go ahead and throw it in that Bank of America savings. Put it in a liquidity fund. Pay your fee.
Yo, you don't have to tell people my business like that. That's not nice.
No. Listen. I'm with you. I'm right there.
Most people don't know.
Yes, I'm right there parking my money, and these suckers ain't giving me nothing.
Nothing.
The alternative is if you're not, if you don't have a brokerage account, you're not interested in opening a brokerage account, you can't wrap your mind around paying fees on cash. You could also use an online bank. Online banks always have higher returns and yields than brick and mortar banks.
Yes. So online banks are liquidity funds, and don't be scared. Don't be afraid of the fees.
Correct.
Okay.
If someone's managing your money, that's what I mean.
That's the talent.
Work hard.
Yeah. That's the talent. Don't be afraid to pay the talent. We all want to get paid what we're worth, but we don't want to pay the people who managing our money. So okay.
There's a little Haitian proverb, and I'll translate it when I'm done, that says, "Senti bon coûte cher."
Mm-hmm.
It costs to smell good. If you ever buy drugstore perfume, alcohol does not smell the same as Chanel. It costs, and down the line, that little spray of Chanel, 8 hours later, people are still wondering, "Ooh, what is that?" There's a reason for it, and that doesn't mean, overpay for anything, but worth having is worth investing.
Exactly.
So a question in the chat. Someone asked, should their savings be in a liquidity fund? Yes. Or an online account that pays you more than what our banks are paying us. And then someone else asked, is a liquidity fund similar to a money market?
Kind of. In terms of how it operates, yes. In terms of the underlying investment, no, not really.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure, but in essence, they're different. They have some differences.
Your experience with it as a customer is the same. What's happening to your money?
Where does one obtain a liquidity account?
I'm sorry?
Where does one obtain a liquidity account? Who would I go to if I was searching for a liquidity account?
Any brokerage, any investment brokerage, because it's an investment product.
Got it. And investment brokerages, we're not obviously plugging or recommending any, but so folks can do their own research. What are just a few popular ones or big names that people may have heard of?
There's Merrill Edge, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price. I'm trying to think of some of the others.
No, those are good. I just wanted to. That's good. That's plenty. I just wanted folks to have an idea so they could go take a look on their own.
Yes.
So we're now ready, right? We're ready to invest. So we've gotten all of our things covered. And just to give a quick recap, Amarel, I'm calling on you, right? Like this is class. What's our first thing that we're supposed to do?
Get our documents together.
Yes. What are the documents?
That's laying the foundation.
Yes.
Laying the foundation. Get your documents together. Get your paperwork life in order.
Correct. So what are our documents, Amarel, for those who just joined in?
See, it's a good thing I take notes. It's a good thing.
I knew you took notes.
Get your will together.
Get your will.
Power of attorney.
Power of attorney.
Whether or not you're doing a will or a trust.
2 power of attorneys. You need your medical and then your standard.
Yes.
Yes. Get your power of attorney, get your will, your trust. I didn't want to dive too deep into it. I'm going to let you get to the top of the pyramid, and maybe when we circle back around for questions, I may have specific questions about trust. But yes, that's level 1. Let's get all of our documentation together before we're even lay the foundation.
Correct. So and then after we get our power of attorneys, we already have our will, we have our life insurance, right? So will, power of attorneys, life insurance.
Now protected.
Get protected, and then savings, 12 months, right? And then now, once you have all of that, now we are where we are at now to talk about the investment.
Right now.
So someone asked a good question. They said, are online banks also protected? Are online banks also FDIC insured, basically?
Yes.
Yes, they are. Okay.
If you go with a United States-based bank, there are some, I think, like Canadian banks online and things like that. Just make sure you go with a US-based bank, but they all have disclaimers. Like they're required to have FDIC like logos and things like that, so that you're very well aware that they're.
Now, for my ballers out there, FDIC only goes up to 250. So if you put in a little more than 250 in the bank, 250,000.
Because something is wrong.
Exactly. So something's wrong. But folks, we're trying to help folks get there. But just know that FDIC insured is only up to 250,000. Okay, great. So we're ready to invest. Danny, we're sorry this is going long, but everybody's so engaged and this is so important. So okay, Ayo, now what do? We finally there. We took care of all of our paperwork. Let's go.
So once you finally have everything in place to be ready to invest, you have to sit down before you sit down with your financial professional, and you have to consider 3 things. The first thing is your purpose. What is the purpose of your investing? If you have $250,000 or $500,000, what is the goal of that money? Is it for retirement? Is it for college savings? Is it for both? You have to clearly identify exactly what your goals are. Number 2 is your time horizon. So if you say, okay, well, 150,000 of this I want to use towards my retirement. Well, when do you want to retire? Do you want to retire in 5 years, or do you want to retire in 25 years? Because what we do with that money as financial professionals is entirely dependent on that. And the third thing is your risk tolerance. So typically the risk scale goes conservative, moderately conservative, moderate, moderately aggressive, aggressive. So everyone falls somewhere on that scale. And a good financial professional will either ask you a series of questions or actually give you a questionnaire to help you identify. But when you go in to meet with them, you should have an idea of where you fall on that scale. The one thing that I do caution people on, and again, is something that I saw very frequently, is you don't necessarily have to have a set risk tolerance. So for instance, and it's not typically expected. So for instance, if you're relatively young and you have a longer risk or time horizon until you retire, on that particular component of your portfolio, you may be looking to take on more risk than you would say for a college savings portfolio, wherein depending on how it's structured, sometimes the states don't even allow you to take make fully aggressive asset allocations on college portfolios. So this isn't something that's static. It's very dynamic, again, which is why the first thing we identify is your goals. Because if this is a pool of money that we're using for multiple purposes, if it's a pool of money, if it's money that we're using for one single purpose, then that's how we need to identify for each segment of the asset. Does that make sense?
Yes. So
it does. Give us those 3 points again.
Yes, please.
The purpose and goal of the money. What do you want to do with this money? The second is your time horizon. How long before you need to use this money for that goal? And the third is your risk tolerance.
So that's so important, because one of the things, and Amaral and I kind of talked about this last week, and then I want to pose a question. So many times we have people in the Haitian community and Black communities that are like, all right, I'm ready. Let's do this. I got $10,000. I got $20,000, but then they want the money back in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So this thing, this money thing, this wealth thing, it takes time. And I think that we really struggle with that. At least I'll speak for myself in Haitian communities and people that I come into contact with. There really tends to be a struggle in terms of grasping the concept of time and long term.
That is the crux of the matter, right? Like that's why I was joking with Amaral when I said, don't worry, we'll get to it. Because there's no rush, right? Like we always say in the industry, it's never a matter of timing the market. It's not buying this when it's low and selling it when it's high. It's time in the market.
It's never about timing the market. It's time in the market. Well, I hope y'all taking notes, because this is.
I'm sorry.
No, these
That's
are
worth
so,
noting.
these
That's
are
worth noting.
amazing. These are amazing gems. Please go ahead, well, let me ask you one question before. Someone asked a question. They said, for a new couple, Don Clark, for a new couple, congratulations on your new relationship, by the way, Don. Where does the house purchase come in if they have no investments but have some savings? They don't have 12 months though. So this is interesting because we have a realtor here and we have a financial investment professional here. So two professionals, maybe with different schools of thought. So I'd love to hear both of your opinions on this. Again, Don Clark, new couple, where does the house purchase come in if they have no investments but have some savings, but they do not have 12 months worth?
Have they purchased the house, or is this a newly purchased home?
No, I think they're thinking about where does the house purchase come, where they're thinking about purchasing or they're wanting to purchase.
Don't.
And let me just say before you go, Ayo, really want to thank everyone in the chat just for being so open about your personal journeys and kind of where you are. Money's a really tough thing, to grasp, to wrap our heads around. So thank you for being so transparent and vulnerable with your own situations. Okay, thoughts, Ayo, and then Amaral, please.
Don't. In general, I mean, Gil, you know personally how I feel about just in general.
You shared that with me, so I'm curious.
Yes, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. But so, Ayo, you're telling Don or someone in a similar situation, do not buy the home.
You are looking at literally saving money to purchase a debt when you have no other assets. That does not make sense.
Let me just say, the first time I heard this, it expletive my head up. I'm not gonna curse on the air. I'm just gonna say it expletive my head up.
I mean, we come from Wall Street.
Okay, so Ayo, you're saying do not. Now, and she said they're together and they have about 180K in income together.
Income doesn't matter. What assets do you have?
And you're saying, Ayo, before I move to Amarel, you're saying, based on what I'm hearing, that a home is not an asset, it is a debt.
Are you looking to buy the home cash? Because if you're looking to buy the home cash, then you should still put it in a portfolio. We leverage the portfolio and you pay yourself back. So there's still no reason to take on that debt.
Let me ask you, because Gil shared.
I was talking that Wolf of Wall Street money. So now, Amro, please, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead, Amro.
No, let me ask you, because Gil and I actually had briefly, we had a little bit of this conversation before we got on with you, because he shared that you are, for the most part, don't put the money into a house. Understanding that you are, in fact, putting a down payment and going in taking on the debt, how do you consider it in relation to, you have to live somewhere? And if I don't own, and I would imagine I don't live, for free at my mother's house, if I don't own and I'm renting, where do those two things meet? And I shouldn't take on the debt of actually purchasing real estate, even if it's real estate that I'm going to live in as my primary. How does that work against the fact that I still need to pay for somewhere to live?
Because the fact that you are writing a check every month, right? Your experience of writing that check every month is apples and apples, right? But when I sit down with your actual balance sheet of who you owe money to, it's not. Who you owe money to is, I owe JP Morgan Chase Bank on this $200,000 mortgage when I don't owe that on a lease. Like, on your perspective, it puts you in the negative. So from an accounting perspective, it's like, in terms of what you actually have and what you actually owe, that's where the deficit comes in.
Okay.
That makes sense?
I get that. I absolutely get that. So where does where I reside come in? So I think about my budget. I think about where my funds are going, on a monthly basis. We take out a 30-year mortgage. Chances are, well, either Americans within 5 to 7 years are going to refi out of that and take out a new bit of debt that's going to also have its own closing costs and additional fees to it. So really, I completely get in our 30-year mortgage structure that you are in fact taking on a debt. but I'm still not sure. And this is my real estate mind, and this is my, but not my investing mind. Right. I'm still not sure how that coincides with owning a home that paying on a monthly basis on a home that I'm actually building equity in, especially in a place like South Florida where rents are outrageous. If I'm expending those funds anyway on a monthly basis.
So when we were talking previously about the pivot in mindset, this is it. This is it. Because we were raised to believe that if home ownership is your foot in the door and it's your access to everything, and it's for most people the home is the most valuable asset that they own, right? But that's by design, because essentially the rate at which you grow equity in your home does not exceed the rate at which you can grow equity in your portfolio. Therefore, if you were to take the money that you would put into paying off a mortgage, let's say, right? Or the excess, savings, down payment, all of that. Because let's say during the time that you're saving, if you save for a year on a down payment, right? Plus all of the expenses of owning a house, homeowners insurance, all of the other things, property taxes, all the other expenses associated with owning a home. Over time, the amount of the growth that you could experience in a portfolio would exceed the growth on the equity in the home, such that if that couple, for instance, decided we're not going to buy a house right now, we're going to wait 8 years, we're going to take this money and we're going to invest in a portfolio for 8 years. After 8 years, they could potentially have enough assets, depending on how they're funding the portfolio, obviously. They could potentially have enough assets in that portfolio to leverage it, buy the house cash, and pay themselves back.
Hold up, let me back up 1 second.
Hold on. Or, so in year 9, you could potentially have a portfolio that has growth that now you're paying yourself back on, or be 9 years in on a 30-year mortgage. That's where you would be. Those are your apples and oranges.
So a couple questions from the chat. First of all, let me just say this. If you're in the chat, and this is the first time you've heard this, I know how you're feeling. This is a lot. It will definitely make you rethink your whole life and make you reconsider everything. But I just want to say, really kudos to Avancé Ensemble, kudos to Amarel and Danny for creating a space like this where information can be shared to our community in a very real and honest way. So Amarel and Danny, you guys are awesome. And thank you, Ayo, for just blessing us with this. So someone asked,
for this awesome platform.
Yes, so someone asked, so are we supposed to rent our entire lives? And then the second part to that, someone else asked, what about a duplex where you rent out and live in? So you rent one side out and you live in the other.
So that's not considered a primary residence. From a financial standpoint, that's not considered a primary residence.
So you're okay with the duplexes? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think it's okay to honestly to rent the home that you live in and own a rental property. Yes, okay. Always.
It makes more sense to rent where I live and to own a rental property.
Because again, they're two assets as opposed to an asset and a liability.
Are we taking for granted that this individual who let's say takes on such an ambitious endeavor, and I'm saying ambitious because like Gil, mind blown, right? So are we taking for granted that this person will both be paying for rent where they are, and the amount that they would have been paying towards the debt of a mortgage, they are now funding their portfolio with?
Yes, but keep in mind, real estate is not a primary asset class either. So again, typically when you hear me speaking about buying real estate, I'm talking about it in terms of what? Leveraging the portfolio you already have. because it's funny that people, especially in our communities, we're so concerned about, well, I don't want to take on too much investment risk in my stock portfolio. I could lose everything. But that has not happened, even during the Great Depression. But people have lost literally everything in real estate consistently, like time and time and time and time and time and time again. People have had to sell property for less than they've paid for it. That happens all the time.
So real estate investing. So real estate investing is riskier than investing in the stock market.
Yes. It's falls under the umbrella of alternative investments, which is my specialty. so it's not your typical stock, bond, CD, mutual fund. It's not one of those asset classes, because the factors that impact the real estate market are not necessarily the same. That's why it's considered what's called alternative.
So a couple of things. Dawn says she's pouring herself another drink.
Dawn, pour me one too.
I know this is a lot, for all of us. I think also I want to say, in Haitian communities and Black communities, what happens, I'll at least say, I think what happens, and you guys correct me or chime in, real estate is a low entry point, right? At least it seems that way, because you think that you're going to live in this beautiful home. You're only going to put 3% down or 5% down or 10%. So it seems to us like, it's low hanging fruit. And I happen to need a place to stay, and I'll only have to put 3 or 5 or 7 or 10% down. So, this makes sense. And obviously, it's not going to go up, obviously taxes and things like that, but it's pretty standard. So I think for so many of us, this has long been sold to us, the American dream. Being Haitian, one of the first things you're told consistently is buy a home. Like, if you don't do nothing in this, land or whatever, you come here, your parents have struggled to bring you here, buy a home, own a home. So I think a lot of this is unpacking. We've never had someone share the conversations like this with us, these financial conversations. But, to Ayo's point, you've had people who have these conversations all day long. People who are doing significantly better than maybe, at least Amarel and I'll say. I don't want to speak for our fans out there listening, but, people who are managing millions and millions of dollars, so we want to at least be able to, discipline ourselves to hear what the other half is doing and what they're tapped into. So I think the one thing I'd encourage everyone to do is, sit with this, because it's not something that, Ayo said this takes, sometimes years and months for her to help people digest. So, we don't expect that, we're all going to get this in one conversation. It takes time, but I think it's good that we're just shining a light on other options.
Thank you. It is. It really is. It's not easy to accept that the thing that you've been taught to work towards your entire life maybe is not the best idea, right? But we get this advice from our parents, right? And our parents, we've had the opportunity, many of us have had the opportunity to exceed the level of wealth that our parents have reached, number one. So that's the first thing. Number two is we're coming up in a completely different economy than they did. They came up in a time when, don't do that. Don't bother with stocks. It's too risky. Put your money in a CD. When their vantage point, I mean, for us, we think 1990 was, 15 years ago, but it wasn't, right? Like, for them, it's the same thing. Their vantage point on 1985 was 15, 20 years ago, when CDs were yielding 20%, not the 1.2% they're yielding now. So, when you could purchase a house for $50,000 or $60,000, when the cost of college education was what, $1,000 a semester, or I'm sorry, a year? Like, it's an apples and oranges economy. And we can't continue to think that we can survive and move forward and thrive with people who are inheriting assets, who we're having these conversations about money at the table when we're coming to the table scared of risk. We're coming to the table with old paradigms. We're coming to the table trying to jump ahead of where we need to be when we haven't taken care of our foundational matters first. You see what I'm saying? So there's a whole lot of re-educating that we need to do that we're able to do. Like, I speak to communities like this because we are able to do it. I would not have this conversation in every community, in every crowd. You know what I mean? I understand that it's not always appropriate. And for all of us, it's aspirational. But let me tell you one thing, when I get the call, and I find myself making calls to people who have $2-3 million in an investment portfolio, and they're saying, hey, listen, I need a line of credit because I found this property I want to buy for $250,000, for $300,000. They can see it and buy it because they had the discipline early on to do the right things. So I just want to make sure that our communities also have access to that information to make the choice to have the discipline to be in those same situations, to take advantage of opportunities when they come about.
Is there room, Ayo? And I love the pyramid that you laid out for us. I love that you started with foundation, and are not afraid to tell us that what we've been the way that we've been conditioned to jump into things is probably not the best for us. So I absolutely love that. Is there room in the investment field for, let's say, small investor that has, hey, I have my first $1,000 outside of after I've done my basics, right? I've secured part one and part two, and I'm just a small investor, and I want to dip my toe in. As Rudy and I, well, you know, Rudy, started really dipping our toe into investments recently, and we're still learning, of course, still learning a lot. But I wonder, for those that are out there that, let's say, okay, we've knocked out one and we've knocked out two, what do I do with $1,000 that I have that I would like to venture into investment, or $5,000 that I have that I'd like to venture into investing? Is there room for that investor?
Of course. That's once you initially are crossing that threshold from, protection into investing, that's where everyone sort of starts, right? So typically you're not going to want to do a whole lot of bells and whistles. You don't want to hop into real estate opportunities. You don't want to go into cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or anything like that. It's time in the market. You identify your goal and your purpose. You identify your risk tolerance. If you need to segment up that money so that you have some of it that is for a specific purpose, maybe that is maybe a little more conservative, and the rest of it be a little bit more aggressive, then you segment it up appropriately. And you obviously with the appropriate time horizons for each goal. And then I would suggest something like the Vanguard has a product called the Total Market ETF. And so this product, the reason I like this more than like a typical index fund is that it encompasses the entire market as opposed to just a specific index. So it's not just going to follow the Dow, or it's going to follow the overall trend of the market. So what that means, that for a time like now, right, where markets are sort of fluctuating and all over the place, but essentially lower than they were expected. So you buy in now, you maybe ride it down a little further because most likely that's what's going to happen. But as the overall position in the market goes up, you'll be able to ride that overall wave up. So something like that is what I would recommend for someone just starting out. My other advice would be, do not buy individual stocks.
So someone asked a question here, and this is helpful. They talked about portfolio diversification, and they said that they heard it's best to have at least 15 different companies in your investment portfolio. What are your thoughts on that, and how diverse should the industries we invest in be?
My thoughts on that are, even as a financial advisor, I am not a financial analyst, and neither are you. So you don't choose those things on your own. Even when I sit at the desk and put together a portfolio for a client, I refer on the recommendations of our analysts. I don't, that's not something that I do. It's not my area of expertise. And I definitely would not recommend that a person who's not in the financial field as an analyst do it either. That's why I recommend you choose a fund and you go to a professional, like something like the total market ETF. So you ride the overall direction of the market. And then once your portfolio is sizable enough, you sit down with a professional and say, okay, let's look at some more specific investments that make more sense for me.
Yo, I love to pay the fees. So someone asked a question, they said, why not individual stocks? Why not buy individual stocks?
Because the risk is too high.
Mm.
You can lose, that's how you lose your shirt.
So you said the Vanguard total
market ETF.
The total market ETF?
Yes, exchange traded funds.
Traded funds. Okay, awesome. So there it is. That's why you shouldn't buy individual stocks. Okay, so now we begin investing. We're at this place. Yes, go ahead, Ayo.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure, very sure. Like, does that make sense to that person, the person who asked that question?
In terms of the why not buy individual stocks?
Yes, because I feel like a lot of people have that question. Like,
go a bit further. Go a bit further, because I think, especially, I mean, Amrel brought up a great point. Usually, when you start off small, I know when I invested way back in the day when I was in college, all I was doing was buying individual stocks. Me and my friends thought we were analysts. We didn't know nothing about it.
Where did you end up, though?
Where did we end up?
Did it work out?
Oh, we did all right. I mean, but not nearly as well, as we probably could have had we really sought the experience of a professional.
It's a great way to lose not only your money, but your enthusiasm and optimism for markets early on. So I would say maybe you set a benchmark for yourself. If you have $5,000 to invest, maybe you set a benchmark for yourself. Okay, when I reach $10,000 or when I have $15,000, I'll take $500. I'll take $1,000 and see what happens. Like even managing multi-million-dollar accounts, you still have people who want to carve off a small, 2% of the account just to play with themselves. Like that doesn't go away. But at the end of the day, that was money that they were willing to lose 100% of. Because that's when you're putting all your eggs, that's literally putting all your eggs in that one basket. That's what can happen potentially.
So someone asks, what about packages that Motley Fool sells with a list of stocks? Those stocks hit. Any thoughts on that?
I know they exist. I don't know anything about the quality of them or their analysts or anything.
Perfect. Thank you. This is so good. One of the things that I'd like to probably bring up also is that, what do you recommend for the folks that are actually in a home, right, or currently have a home, and they're hearing this and they're like, damn, I got another 28 left on that mortgage, or I got another 16 left on that mortgage. Now I'm here in Iowa. What do I do now? Exactly. So what would you say to those folks?
The very first thing you always want to be doing is making sure your interest rates are as low as possible. So now's a great time to refi. It's a great time to refi. That right out the gate, that would be my first recommendation. And then working to pay you have to balance, right, between paying off that debt and paying yourself.
So I'm gonna one thing I love is sometimes I was controversial, not in that she's like a controversial figure, but just in that, the information is new to so many people, so it seems controversial. So talk to me, Ayo, briefly about your thoughts on debt, right? And then also, let's start there. What are your thoughts on debt?
I have a whole philosophy. Thanks for asking. I basically just don't believe in the notion that we as middle-class people should be obsessed with paying off acquiring a lot of debt to begin with, number one, right? You shouldn't be obsessed with living outside of our means to begin with. But the debt that we have, especially that unavoidable debt like student loan debt and things like that, you do what you can, essentially. You know what I mean? Like, affluent people claim bankruptcy all the time and move on with life. You know, the goal is to be able to become the bank of yourself. When you have enough assets that it doesn't really matter, get a loan, don't get a loan, you can borrow from yourself. That's when you really have true financial power. When you can pick up the phone and say, oh, I found this business I want to buy. Oh, I found this house I want to buy, this apartment complex I want to buy. Let me just borrow it from myself. That's true power. So if you can't really, a lot of what do you call it? Like motivational coaches, they'll always tell you, you can only focus on one goal at a time. So your goal can either be to pay them or to pay you, but you can't have both as your number one goal. And the primary difference between rich people and middle-class people is middle-class people are obsessed with paying you and rich people are obsessed with paying me. So if you want to become affluent, you should be obsessed with paying yourself. Everybody
I'm obsessed with paying myself. I need to sit with that for a moment, Ayo. I need to sit with that for a moment. We even on this program, when we did speak about debt, we definitely are not pro carrying a whole bunch of debt. But that mindset of being obsessed with paying me with, let's say, we have to say that this is not for the faint of heart at all. And a lot of the advice that we've been so fortunate to have professionals share with us over the past couple of weeks is not to be handled loosely, because when we start mixing various mindsets, or when we are not set, our mind isn't set in one particular direction, and I'm doing a little bit of what Io did, but I'm doing what Io said, but I'm also doing a little bit of what Dave Ramsey said. I'm doing a little bit about what they said that one time. I think sometimes I take personal responsibility for the information that I share with people, because I do not want you to mix these two ingredients in the wrong way,
right,
and end up with a mess. Whereas with your professionalism and your expertise, no, this should really turn into a mosaic, and mine just turned into a bunch of broken pieces of glass. So even things like debt, for example, when we talk to people about, like, you should have credit, this is one of the things that we talked about in debt. You should have some semblance of credit for the sake of credit history, but not for the sake of purchasing things that I otherwise would not be able to afford. And we have to tread lightly in saying that, because if you start off with, the people said that I should have credit, and start swiping our credit card, swipey go swipey, and then I don't have the mindset or have taken the steps to actually, hey, credit is a tool, not an accessory, then
well, that's why we start out,
this
right?
advice really ended up putting you in a best
financial planning is the premise of your planning and your investing, right? Like, everything before we got to that step of crossing the threshold of investing, I didn't ask you anything about what you wanted to do, like, except with what you already had, right? But when it came to acquiring more, then it's, what do you want to do with this? Because again, it's being single-minded. So if you truly are singularly minded with paying yourself, you're not going to be obsessed with buying all these other things. Like, that's not a priority with your credit. You see what I'm saying? So everything sort of, those broken glass pieces start fitting together. Like, that's why I say, like, as a financial planner, like, we take the 10,000 foot view and put all the pieces together. You see what I mean? So the attitude around the use of credit fall in line when you know, oh, I don't have time to do that right now. I can't take on, $10,000 of debt to buy some shoes and a bag, because I do need to get this money in my portfolio because I want to buy a house in 3 years. It crystallizes everything.
everything else. You tell your money what to do so that you tell, how do we start in budgeting? I tell my money where to go so that I don't have to wonder where it went.
Exactly.
Like I have to make the conscious decision as to what I'm doing with all of it. Otherwise, this decision over here ends up torpedoing everything else. Gil, I am going to tell you that we are, what time is it, Gil? Danny,
yeah, I
we didn't even think, Danny is like,
yeah.
Danny is loving this. So this is two parts. I'm imagining how our third partner's brain is going.
Yes.
She is absolutely, a lot of what you're sharing, I could so see Danny being like, absolutely, I pay myself first, I plan my life, but she's also sitting here like, are we really gonna do 2 hours, guys? Are we really gonna do 2 hours tonight?
I guess we'll just end, like, we have one question, we'll take one question. You know, the thing is, there's so much to talk about. This is so deep. This is
great
so
info.
Really about unlearning. And we, you know, I think Sandra said a part 2. We probably really will have to do a part 2 because we just kind of got to the stage of actually starting. And this, maybe, you know, between a part 1 and a part 2, it'll give people time to mentally grasp kind of some of this newness. You know, someone asked, talk more, I guess this will be our last point, talk more about how wealthy people become their own bank.
Simple. Mm-hmm. It's mindset. What you call debt, they call leverage.
Mm. Can you explain debt and leverage? Because everybody, you know, might not necessarily be there. So explain what you mean by debt and leverage and what that looks like.
So essentially, going back to the example of buying a home, right? You can go to JP Morgan Chase and say, listen, I'm going to take out, I need $200,000 to buy this house. Or you can be patient, build up your own portfolio, and then call JP Morgan Chase and say, listen, I have $500,000 in my portfolio. I need a line of credit against my assets.
Can we use a smaller number?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to 50,000.
Let's start there.
Well, I have a portfolio worth, I'm trying to think in terms of what the limits are for some of these things, because there again, access. We have to, as a community, we have to really, really, I literally preach this, because the only way we can get there is by being patient and consistent to grow our assets to get to these points, because they literally have doors that unlock at every level of wealth where people can talk to you about different types of assets that exist and asset classes that exist. If you don't have a certain amount of money, they're not even going to talk to you about some of the things that exist. Private equity, what I specialize in, if you didn't have $1 million liquid in cash that you could write a check for, I couldn't even talk to you about it. Like, focus on just having your goal of paying yourself, and it will pay you up first, and it will pay you in the end. But essentially, if you have a portfolio of, let's say, $300,000, and you can call and say, I need a line of credit for $100,000 or $150,000. It will be available to you in cash in your bank account within 24 hours. So now you have $150,000 cash, a $300,000 stock portfolio, and the opportunity to buy another asset.
And now this line of credit. Oh, go ahead, Amrel.
No, I think we're going to ask the same question, so go ahead.
I was going to say, this line of credit, for folks who don't know, are you paying interest on this line of credit?
It depends on the institution and how they structure it. Some yes, some no. Well, no, that's not true. Typically, yes, but you're paying it back to yourself.
Got it.
The rates and all that and how the contracts are structured, that's what varies from institution to institution, but you're paying yourself back the interest. But you're never going to pay, you're not going to pay the interest rate that you would pay on a mortgage. You're going to pay the interest rate that banks pay themselves. You're going to pay the prime rate.
And it forces you, we've talked about line of credits in the past, in that I often will say to clients who are thinking about purchasing a house, because that's how I feed my son.
Yes.
who are thinking about purchasing, and let's say they have funds in their retirement account, their 401k per se, and are thinking about taking the funds out in order to do that, which I discourage. We often will advise taking a loan out against that asset as opposed to actually taking the money out. And my mindset about that has always been, most of us will sooner pay someone else back with that obligation than we would if we took that money out and then say, I'm going to regularly replenish that account. So it's similar to that, except it's not a retirement account asset, it's my own portfolio assets, right?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
The only difference is for middle class people, they only allow it on retirement assets.
Yo, you see that? Middle class people, we getting really heavily.
It's the same thing.
It's the same exact thing. Because I'm like, the only time that I've heard of us being able to do that, usually it is against a retirement asset. It's not usually.
And here's the
didn't know my portfolio.
We never, as middle class people, we so seldom get to the next level of investing. Like once you get your primary level of investing for everybody is retirement. Then on top of that is maybe college planning. And then maybe on top of that is, all right, well, I want to get to what we call retail investing. And that's where all the bells and whistles and magic is. Like that's where everything happens. Like all the different asset classes and all the things that go boom in the night. And like, you know, that's where that is. But middle class people are all but excluded from that space because we don't have the foundation in place to level up to get there.
So I think that we're out of time.
I was like, Gil, you got to bring us home. You got to bring us home, Gil.
You know, I do want to say again, if you're in the chat, just give Io a damn hand. Give her like endless rounds of applause. And even your fans in the back here.
Love Ebony.
Yes, love
you. So just want to really thank Io for, you know, just bringing this information to our community. Amarel, well, again, Io, you know, really, I talked about your brilliance earlier, but I hope that the folks listening and who will go on to hear this again and time again, you know, can actually understand just how brilliant and amazing you are and what you're doing for communities like ours, in terms of educating us, showing us that there are different ways to look at things, you know, showing us that we have options, but also really not letting us forget the foundational pieces. I think the one thing, the big takeaway for many of us in watching this and being a part of this is that we were doing this backwards. And how big and how important a component the base is, and getting that pyramid intact. I want to thank everybody in the chat who was so gracious to just, you know, ask their questions, be very transparent and vulnerable about their own situations. Amarel, this is really, I want to thank Amarel because she just let me kind of crash.
This has been so good.
Thank you.
She just let me crash these last couple, so I want to thank Amarel for having me. But this is really, you know, Amarel and Danny's baby. Lajan Lakay, this Wealth series, I think has been such a gift to the Avancé family, has been such a big gift to other communities who've tuned in. You know, we have a great group of people at Avancé doing so many cool things behind the scenes. This is just one of them. I think we've covered politics, we've covered sex and relationships, we've covered finances, we've covered food. So, you know, just tune in and pay attention because we're doing some really, really cool things. And y'all have gotten all of this for free. So in a minute, y'all gonna have to start paying up. Okay, pay those fees, like Io said. And I just want to thank everybody. This has been such a great pleasure to be a part of this. And Amarel, please take us out. Io, you know, Io ain't cheap, so let me just say that her services ain't cheap. If y'all gonna want to talk to her, y'all gonna have to pay her. You know, you can't just, you know, think you about to buy her a mocha latte and she about to drop these gems on you. This is not how it works. So I'll let Io.
I do what I can to help. I try to help.
Correct. She'll try, but don't come with no mocha latte and think you about to, you know what I'm saying, going from middle class to wealth. offer you a croissant and a mocha latte. It don't work like that. But Ayo, if you could please, just say a few words in closing.
Awesome.
And Amarell, I'd love for you just to close us out. Thank you.
I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Thank you to Amarell, to Avancé Ensemble, it's Gil for hosting. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to people and sort of get this information out there. I kind of consider myself kind of the Robin Hood of financial knowledge.
Yes.
So, anything, I'm just hopeful that, everyone was able to take at least one or two little morsels of knowledge that they were able to implement into your own lives. And, hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon. And yeah, I hope everyone found it beneficial. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And I was not telling everyone don't buy a house. I'm saying don't buy a house if you're not ready to buy a house. I'm just helping you identify when you are ready to buy a home.
Right. And
there are steps to this, there are levels to this, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. There is nothing, the best clients are well-informed ones, I find. At whatever income level, the best clients are well-informed clients. And I am so grateful that I just want to remind us tonight, all the Wednesday nights over the past few weeks, it's that reminder, folks, there's greatness among us. Let's pause on that. There's greatness among us. The sacrifices that whether you are from the islands or wherever it is that you happen to be from, the sacrifices that the generations that came before us made, I'm very, very grateful that we've been able to show you just a little bit that it hasn't been in vain. It has not been in vain, the sacrifices that whether it's our parents or the ancestors before us made, because the wealth of information that we've been able to share and as Gil said, at no cost to you, up until this point, and just highlighting such professionals in our community has definitely been a joy and a pleasure for me. I'm grateful for Avancé Ensemble. I'm grateful for you, Ayo. I really am. That you just really have shared just so many great gems. I finally was able to get on the chat because every time I'm looking down, I'm trying to figure out, for some reason, I couldn't get on the chat. But just a lot of wows, just a lot of mind blowns, just a lot of our people really enjoying this time for us together. And Gil, I'm so glad that you were part of this, especially tonight, because you definitely made it a even better conversation for our community. So, and with that, guys,
One second, don't close, Amaral. Someone asked one question. They asked, Ayo, how can people find you and how much do you charge? Like, if you're like sitting down with someone like a one-on-one, a coaching session or something like that.
The best way to reach me right now is just to reach out on LinkedIn. My name is Ayo Tillman, Tillman. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can connect there.
And do you have a fee or not necessarily? Like, the fee may vary.
If it's just a quick question or something like that, I'm not gonna.
Okay. So Ayo said if it's a quick question, she might answer. But if you're trying to do 5 and 6 or 7 questions, get your money right. She got a Cash App, she got a Venmo, she got all of that.
If it's actual planning.
Yes, if it's actual planning.
Yeah.
So again, Ayo Tillman, I posted it in the chat. Reach out to her on LinkedIn. And someone asked, do you manage baby non-affluent accounts?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Reach out to her on LinkedIn.
I'm in discussions with another firm considering the possibility.
So there may be some things there, but just reach out to her on LinkedIn. Ask her your questions. Obviously, you guys have seen she's a wealth of knowledge. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure.
I also be launching an IG where I'll be posting information. Cool. That should be going live within the next few weeks. But if you guys want to take it down and just send a friend request now, it's anonymous_advisor_.
I'm going to post it. Hold on one second.
Anonymous_advisor_. And it ends with an underscore.
Yes. Unfortunately.
And once she goes live, I am sure our awesome marketing person, Nora for Avancé Ensemble, will make sure that the Avancé Ensemble community gets the link to make sure that we are following this greatness. So we
Thank
will
you.
definitely make sure. And with that, family, we come to the end of our series. We will continue to partner together. So the Ask Amaral concept, and I shared this at different points, is that this stuff really engages me. I love all things money, smaller levels, higher levels, all things money really interests me. And being in both taxes and real estate, which covers a lot, I find that my friends often have questions about something that has nothing to do with either. But the concept is always, hey, we'll just ask Amaral. So it's great to have access to great people like yourself and great experts like yourself to kind of bring to the community and to kind of bring to the various platforms. So that's what this collaboration was. It's Ask Amaral with Ava Sansam. And we will continue to work together because as a board member, and this is close to my heart, Ava Sansam, so we will continue to work together. And over the next couple of months, couple of weeks, we will definitely still continue to share information, whether it's in the form of a live or in some other manner. We are not going away because this has been just so fulfilling for us individually, and we definitely hope for our community. So thank you so much to all of our participants. Thank you so much to tonight's guests and co-hosts, and to all those that graced our live over the past few weeks. If you are not yet following Ava Sansam on all platforms, what are you doing? Go ahead and hit the button now to make sure that you're following. And because as we bring you great things, there's an election brewing from what I understand, and it seems to be getting good. More greatness going on. So therefore, we share all those on all the topics that actually touch our lives. So please make sure to follow us. Gil is one of the people who's organizing and putting together our membership drive that's coming. Please, when you see that, if you have enjoyed what Ava Sansam has been providing you with over these months and over these actual years, definitely put your money where your mouth is. The fees are not exorbitant, but put your money where your mouth is and join this movement. Thank you guys so much. And